Episode of the Joyful Mate podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher, your joyful journey mentor, and thank you for joining me once again today as I share more insights on joy, happiness, and fulfillment. Today's topic is communication, and it's around is the busy world causing us a loss or costing us meaningful relationships? And you probably know the hustle culture that we live in, the busyness, and it's very fad to say that, yeah, I'm busy, everyone to fit in, I'm busy, and we're all saying I'm busy, and we're all rushing around doing things, not necessarily thinking much about what we're doing, but more doing in order to achieve more and accomplish more, and often feeling unfulfilled in that process. Because are we actually chasing or in pursuit of something that's meaningful to us, or are we in pursuit of something that is meaningful to someone else and we think that we need to be more like them? So let's get back to the communication piece of this topic. So this has come about because I'm talking on the art of active listening, and I've been doing a bit of a deep dive into it and been considering why we have lost this active listening. And it is very much driven from this busy culture that we live in, this technology savvy, technology driven culture. We're going through another technology evolvement, which is now AI. And we're obviously interacting with bots, and we're very much messaging a lot more today, and communication has become more shortened, more precise, quicker, which as there is benefits to it, of course. Benefits when we need to transact, but what we lose in the transaction is the relation. And this is around the connection piece, because yes, sometimes we need to transact and share content in terms of communication, but often content can be so separate or distant from context that we don't get the full meaning of the communication. So if you were to picture a iceberg, so an iceberg, you've got the tip of the iceberg that's out of the surface, and then you've got, and that's probably a third, and then 2/3 is beneath the surface. The third above the surface is very much the content that we're sharing. And the 2/3 beneath the surface is the context around the information or the information we're sharing. And then the entire iceberg is the meaning behind what we're sharing. So, yes, we do need content, but it's only a portion of the overall communication. And with today's way of messaging and talking to one another and interacting, it's becoming very transactional, and we're losing relationships. We're becoming more distant and more disconnected. And you see this upon the surveys and research that are being conducted, that people are feeling more lonely today than ever before, and particularly post-pandemic, because the pandemic very much drove more of this technology-based communication and distance between communication. Yes, it saves time, but it also, I think it saves time initially, but in the long term, it costs us time and it costs us productivity, because we end up over communicating and missing the message and not getting the point across and having to redo things as a result of inefficient communication, because we've lost the part of the context and we lose the overall meaning of the communication that we're trying to share. So, like in terms of why this has happened, well, you look at, leading up to COVID, we were very much very little of us were working from home, and we were going into the office. And so when you're face to face with a person, you can pick up more meaning behind the communication through body language. However, with technology and doing more communication from home and talking to other people via computer, that body language can be lost, particularly with IT companies that have said, Well, we'd prefer you to turn off your camera so that we don't use up as much bandwidth, or we don't use up as much data, or we can continue to run our systems on, you know, I guess restrictions around bandwidth and making sure we can maintain communication. So a lot of the presentations I do are to people. I'm presenting to an audience that has their camera turned off. So I can't read their body language when they, asking a question, and it's hard to pick up the context and the meaning behind what the message of what they're sharing, because the only thing I pick up is some words, and the spoken words, a bit of content. However, it's not the true meaning of what they're trying to say. And you pick up this true meaning through being in person, through being with the person, through reading their body language, through that intuitive ability. And intuition really comes down to being entirely present. We're more present when we're with the person in front of us. When we have that distance through communication mediums, we're less present. And you probably relate to this. When you're talking on the phone, you'll generally multitask. And you see people when they're on Teams meetings, they're multitasking. And when we're with people, we do less multitasking and we're more engaged. So in essence, there's very little distance in terms of separation, and time collapses because you're present with them. And so time and space is really narrowed, and we become more present. And that's when our intuition is at its strongest. And we can pick up the underlying message behind the communication through being with someone. And I've recently realized this through, I guess, the way in which I network. So I do a lot of networking via, podcasting, for example. I do a lot of networking via social media and putting out content in social media and interacting over social media through, comments and a bit of texting and things like that. And I've recently started to make more effort to attend face-to-face events, simply because the connections are so much more meaningful and so much more memorable, so much more deeper. And we build trust a whole lot faster when we're in that deeper connection, when we have that full presence and we can understand the full meaning behind the communication. We can better relate to the person. We develop actually relationships a whole lot faster through face-to-face connection. And so we really need to find this balance between this meaningful connection and just sharing content. And yes, there's a place for text messages and Messenger and things like that when we just need to get across content, like just letting people know this is where I'll be at this time, where it's not that important to get the full context because it's quite clear as to what the context is around that communication. So we before we communicate, we need to think about how important is the context and the meaning in this communication I'm about to share. And if it's to develop stronger relationships, then it's really important. If it's just to share information and just get across a bit of content, then the context and meaning behind it is less significant. So we really want to think before we're communicating as to what's the outcome of this communication. Is it what I want to develop a stronger connection with this person? Well, then the only way that's going to happen is through a physical face-to-face catch up, because we'll accelerate that process of understanding one another, relating to one another, and developing a deeper connection. And it will take a lot longer to do that via Teams meetings or Zooms or whatever other medium that is more, greater spatial distance. And in essence, time's diluted because we're not as present when we can draw more presence. And the more present we are, the more, I guess, body language and intuition is stronger. And so we can make more of an effort, but it's just harder when the person's just not there. As you know, you've been in these situations when when they can, when they're not fully present. And you can tell when you're, face to face with someone and they're not fully present. You can see it in their eyes. You can see their eyes wandering. You can see that they're not really connected with what you're saying because they're missing key parts of the information. And so you can pick up very quickly if someone is disconnected in a face-to-face conversation, whereas it takes a bit more time, when we're doing it through a video medium or the old, phone call, which has become really a distant way of communicating or a old way of communicating. So in essence, what I want to share is really understanding what you want to get out of the connection. If you want to deepen the connection, then prioritizing face-to-face, investing time into face-to-face will deepen the connection quicker, build trust quicker, and you'll develop a stronger bond. If you know the person and it's just getting across some information, then text messages is fine. But certainly you need to understand whether what's more important here, is it the relationship or the transaction? And the relationship requires more face-to-face connection. It requires more time and less distance, ideally, to create a sense of presence or a stronger sense of presence, and to pick up the whole meaning of the interaction and understanding of the message. Whereas if it's transactional, then obviously Messenger and things like that are fine, and they work. But we are tending to lean more towards the transactional side of things because of the fast pace of life. And we think we need to be more productive when we're so busy. But what we need to stop and pause and think about is, what's most important to me? What's most important in terms of this interaction? And what's going to be the best medium to enhance this interaction, to get the best outcome in terms of what you're desiring in terms of the interaction? And that requires a bit of stopping and thinking before just responding. Is it better that I don't respond via text and I actually call the person, because I need to get a better feeling or deeper connection as to the context of where they're coming from, and to extract meaning from the message and understanding, and therefore being able to better relate to them, and ultimately better communication will result from that. I think today we're actually over communicating and making more mistakes and having to correct those mistakes, which is actually costing us productivity. So unless we actually stop and pause before we communicate and think about the best medium and consider that, we may be costing ourselves productivity in the long run. And I think, in the busy world we live in today, it's very easy just to shoot away text messages and things like that, and often having to call back messages or apologize and things like that, which damage the relationship because the context has been lost, the meaning around the communication has been lost because you chose the wrong medium because you wanted to do things fast. So I hope this has been insightful in terms of just stopping and thinking around how you're communicating, what's the outcome you want to achieve, and how could you more effectively achieve that outcome through choosing a more appropriate medium for interaction. So please share any feedback on the podcast. I'd love to hear it. I love to interact with the listeners and hear whether the content is dropping or resonating with you, and what more would you like to learn about, what more insights, what additional guests or expertise would you like on the podcast, because this is here to bring more joy, happiness, and fulfillment into your lives. So thank you for listening. Please share it with others that could benefit from this, that might be struggling with communication. But you'll know if they're struggling with communication is if they're feeling lonely or disconnected. That's the telltale symptom that they're not they're not communicating effectively. And we see this in the Generation Z today that grew up with the technology and all these faster ways of communicating, is that they're feeling more lonely than anyone. And it is a symptomology of, I guess, the environment that they grew up in, which was very technology driven. And, to help the Gen Z, we need to encourage them to do more face-to-face interactions, to develop those more meaningful and deeper connections. So that's a telltale sign, is if you're feeling a bit lonely or disconnected, is your choice of mediums for communication and developing and enhancing relationships is not the best choice and being ineffective for you. So it's time to, think more about how you communicate and investing more time into the relationship side of things and less time into the transactional side of things, and finding that balance between transaction and relation and what's the outcome you're trying to achieve. If you're looking for help in this area, please reach out. I can certainly help guide you and support you in terms of having more effective communication, therefore relationships in your life. Thank you once again, and continue to discover more joy, happiness, and fulfillment on this podcast.